and welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving.
That's true.
In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection.
Hmm.
This week, our friend, Dr. Corey Miller, I think he's still our friend,
Maybe.
president of Ratio Christi, joins us to explain the need to be training ambassadors to universities. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie, baby.
Greetings from normally sunny Florida. We've been pretty cloudy for the past few weeks, but I'm going to give the usual greeting. Uh, Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is Where's the Outrage? The game where the woke shall inherit the earth, unless, of course, they're white males. Where's the Outrage? Play it today. Our regular legal disclaimer, our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that will be Dr. Corey Miller, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter referred to as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. The satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach, I just lost my place. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding the satirical content. Our regular notice the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. To ensure your continued access to this program, please go to MidwestOutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And as you do, never fear, this webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. And now, introducing our very special guest, Dr. Corey Miller. So, just don't do any fascist salutes. Those will get you in trouble, okay? Somebody that's been all over social media. Apparently, somebody accidentally did one yesterday. You guys haven't heard that story?
No.
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, he went like this and he went like that.
Oh, yeah, I did.
And
Yeah,
then he
right.
says, "My heart goes out to you," but no, he couldn't have possibly meant that.
No. He
That's
had
not what
to
he.
say
No, he's obviously a Nazi.
Heil Trump or something.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, it was very much. Yeah. So this is the Hogan's Heroes version of legacy media. In any case, yeah. Okay, so how are
So here we go. There's a couple things I want to do to kind of start us off here. One is on the state of the church, and the second one is why we need to train ambassadors to the universities. The state of the church is one that troubles me because we end up sending little Johnny and Jill off to universities in a state of mind that they are unable to even tell the difference between what they're learning there and what the Bible teaches, largely. So, the Barna and Summit Ministries research in 2017 found that only 17% of Christians actually have a biblical worldview. That decreased then, and by 2021, it was only 9%. In 2022, Barna's Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University found that just 37% of Christian pastors in the United States have a biblical worldview. So that tells us that we are sending our young adults off ill prepared to the challenges that they're going to have by their university professors. A few weeks back, Dr. Corey Miller wrote, posted a little piece on his Facebook page regarding Luigi Mangione. The universities are being used to radicalize younger generations. In our poll out yesterday, young Americans under 45, Gen Z and millennials, were nearly 4 times more likely, 31%, to view the United Health CEO assassin, Luigi Mangione, favorably compared to Americans over 45, 8%. The closer in age to university life, the more left one is on most issues. Compare Gen Z to millennials on any issue, for example.
So wait, so can you say that again? The closer I miss.
They are to university life, the more,
Okay, okay.
okay, the more they're inclined to accept socialism, basically. The socialist murder of United Healthcare CEO is a graduate of Ivy League UPenn. Why is that important, Corey?
Because and not just where you graduate. I mean, Elon Musk also graduated from UPenn. But what we're finding is, like in the statistics that came out recent right after the murder of that United CEO, is that below age 45, that is the Gen Z and millennial age groups, you found a remarkable percentage, 31%, four times the number of Americans that were over 45 actually have a favorable view toward that person who murdered the United CEO. And we found out some of his stuff, on his social media and so forth. But it's, the closer in age to university life, the more left one is on most issues. Now, not everyone goes to the university, but about 25% of our population, have bachelor's degrees, fewer masters, and even fewer PhDs. But this person had socialist sympathies, seemed to be anti-capitalist. Maybe he had some health problems. Maybe there was something he had an issue with the United Healthcare, with the insurance agencies, or whatever. But this was a graduate of Ivy League UPenn. You would think that these would be upstanding people. They're certainly smart people, but smart people aren't always good people. It's the
Right,
same UPenn where students embraced the Jewish genocide after the greatest attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. The
right,
same
right.
UPenn whose president had to resign in shame, along with MIT's and then Harvard's, because in front of Congress they could not condemn the from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, which had the strong implication historically of the eradication of Israel, getting rid of the Jewish people. So they didn't want to condemn anything like that. And it was just crazy. And they eventually lost their jobs because of it. And it's the same UPenn that has a Marxist professor I write about in my forthcoming book that openly publishes a book on abolish the family. We know in Marxism, Marx says it can be summarized by abolish private property. Today we hear abolish whiteness. That's the new surrogate for
Right, right.
property, or the capitalist bourgeoisie, and also abolish family as well, because it's all vested in the state. So the stuff that we're learning in the universities doesn't stay in the universities. Maybe
Right.
that's the case with Vegas, but not in the universities. Things go from campus to culture, and today we're all living on campus now.
Right. And it goes from campus to culture through a variety of venues that we don't generally think about. So you're educating this these ideas into the students. Those students then go and become teachers in high schools, grade schools, etc. They're passing those ideas on to their students. They go on to become, I don't know, newspaper talkers. I used to call them reporters, but that's not so true anymore. uh, and so they're passing it in through their articles and the way they ask questions. And it kind of, if we get our worldviews by osmosis, which I would argue we largely do, it seeps into our brains unchecked. We get it from our teachers, we get it from the literature that we read, the books we read, the films that we watch. By and by, we have a worldview that's been developed without our thinking about it, and we hold ideas that we don't even know where they came from.
Mine came from Star Trek. Uh, the it's like where so now I have to live with all these grim realities. Every state's a border state. We all live on campus, and apparently I also dwell in a homeless shelter. I don't know. I mean, how many realities are really my? I mean, we I live near a university, but not really close. It's about a 40-minute drive to the university. And one of the things that, we did not expect was, and I really can't explain how it happened, because this university has been here for almost 30 years. And we've had very few people come from there to our church because of the distance. But suddenly, a couple of years ago, a little cohort started showing up, and it started growing. The reputation of our church and the preaching that we have started spreading, and it's a good thing because we have good preaching in our church. And just the last week, I found out that one of the kind of leaders of these students, he's kind of like a person that people follow in terms of theology and Bible study, has approached one of our counselors and said, I've got some problems with people going through gender issues, the kind that you would not have had when we were in college, the kind that you wouldn't have, people struggling with their gender identities at this university who are now coming to our church and maybe even claiming to be Christians. And this young brother is struggling with how to minister to them. So when you talk about we get things by osmosis, the question I have is, how many people of any age group, let alone the college age group, really are truly independent thinkers? I mean, how many of us at all in society are? It's hard to be an independent thinker because you have to go out and look for information and look for points of view that you might not have ever considered yourself. And so that kind of, to me, dovetails with what you said, Don, about we get our worldviews by osmosis. It's the easy way. It's the lazy way. You just absorb it from people around you. It's the path of least resistance.
Yeah, I mean, I think bias is obvious. Bias is part of human nature. But I used to tell my philosophy students, even though that is the case, and I'm biased and you're biased and everybody's got bias, it doesn't follow that we cannot likewise be rationally objective. And
but we're so surprised. We're so shocked. We're so shocked when we're confronted with our bias. It's like, what? Me biased? It's like, and I've gone through that, and then I've realized that this person is confronting me with my bias because they have a whole world of information that I haven't even been exposed to yet.
Yeah. And I think, there was a meme out a couple of years ago. I loved it. It showed a big water spout coming out of professors going into students' heads. And then there was like this thing coming out, and the water was now coming out the student's mouth. They would be the K through 12 teacher going into their students' heads and so forth. So it's almost like it just runs through people. We're all just conduits.
A river runs through it
of where it's coming from at the top, right? And there's been people who have said, "Oh, come on, Christians aren't under that kind of duress. Conservatives are not under that kind of duress at universities. In fact, it's where they build their faith." Well, yeah, in some cases, but are you really saying that the graduates in heart surgery are coming out of the universities not knowing how to do surgery? Are they not really paying attention to their professors? The accountants coming out are not really knowing how to do accounting when they're coming. Of course they know how to do heart surgery. Of course they know how to do accounting. They're listening to their professors. They listen to TikTok too, perhaps, or maybe only for a short period of time left here, but they are listening to their educators. And so the problem comes in that the ratio of ideological bias among the top educators is so radical. It's disturbing. So, earlier we had discussed the ratio. It comes from, I think, the Washington Times back in 2016, where, or we could look in Jonathan Haidt's literature, The Coddling of the American Mind, or we can find it in Steven Pinker, the Harvard psychologist work. But my information's coming out of statistics from the Washington Times back in 2016 from a scholarly work there, where the ratio of liberal to conservative professors on their way to retirement, 60 and above, was 12-1. For those that are ages 40 and under that are getting tenure, that is 23-1. In the Ivy Leagues, like UPenn, it's 27-1. So that is such a radical ratio. It's no wonder that it becomes such an ideological monolith.
Right.
That it was out of the Ivy Leagues that all the anti-Semitism started coming, getting really crazy in America, getting liberal, sometimes atheist liberals, to start pulling their funding from the Ivy Leagues,
Right.
seeing that these places have become radicalized. Because it's not just that the ratio of liberal to conservative did that. We also have evidence how radical those in the ratio of the left have become. And so if you go to like econolib.org, Brian Kaplan did an article on the prevalence of Marxism in American academia and found that social sciences, approximately 24% of professors admitted to being Marxist. Now, it's not that high in physics, for example, but 1 in 4 in the social sciences.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So it's not just left versus right. It's now radical new left, and new left is the technical term of the critical theory Marcuse type Marxists that dominated the 60s student revolution, that gave the marching orders for the long march through the institutions into the universities. And now it's what we're seeing in the world. We've just had a recent election that's giving pushback against that. But all that DIE is what I call it, crap, really. I mean, just look at the LA fires. Yes, there was a spark. Was it started by an arsonist? Was it started by a Martian? Maybe we'll find that out. But we could have stopped all the carnage had it not been for DEI or DIE. And many people did die because of DEI. You look at the chiefs, the mayor, the fire chiefs, all of them in the leadership ranks, they were all Black, lesbian, Marxist, community organizer, whatever. It wasn't hired based on merit or based on good critical thinking. It was based on evil critical theory.
And they were allowed into academia by people who believed in freedom. And now they've taken over academia and they don't believe in freedom.
Right.
No, they don't. And in fact, I'm looking at an article right now. So because of the radicalization of what happened with the anti-Semitism, back in the latter part of 2024, at the university campuses. I know it happened earlier than that over in Israel, but how our students were radicalized, where they're getting these ideologies. Why is it just on the university campuses that we saw this? It generated a lot of interest in over the years, and now it became part of the Republican platform to get rid of critical race theory in our institutions, in our agencies, and so forth, but especially at the universities, such that Indiana, the state where I live, was able to get a law on the books. I met with the senator who got it passed, that was able to get through even above and beyond what Florida and Texas were able to do, because it was carefully crafted. And that is a viewpoint diversity law that now, when it comes to gaining or retaining tenure, you have to be able to show that not only are you practicing good diversity of skin color and what's between the legs, but the real kind of diversity that really matters on the university, and that is viewpoint diversity. Right. You can't be a radical and be teaching Black Lives Matter, and you're a math professor supposed to be teaching 2 + 2 = 1. There was a reason why professors, conservative and libertarian, and some liberal professors self-censor, because the radical new leftist, the illiberal professors,
will cancel you.
Woke, yes, are dominating the administrations, and through the DEI or DIE departments have moved over from social sciences and humanities into engineering, into mathematics, into medicine, places where they ought not be. And now we're getting fire chiefs and mayors and heart surgeons that are hired not based on merit, but based on skin color or body parts. I don't want to worry about who's doing my heart surgery. I want to know that the person has meritoriously qualified, not that
Yeah.
their skin color is different.
Well, relative to California, we have another issue that kind of connects to that, and that is the worship of Gaia. The whole climate change thing, which started in 1970 with Earth Day, in their literature, they're very clearly saying we need to get rid of Christianity and take care of the earth. They go together. It's a new religion that has grown then down through the generations since 1970 to where climate change is the overarching theme. How does that affect the fire? Well, it means you don't do proper care of nature. Get rid of all of the burnable stuff before the fire takes it away. So they kind of go together. We have this kind of very new agey uh, Marxist ideal that we should have for the planet and for people that just is destructive.
Yeah, right. So there really are only three worldviews. Every other religion, every other belief fits into one or three. There's pantheism, all is mind or all is God. There's atheism, atheism. There's no mind, no God. It's only matter. So all is mind or all is matter. And then there is mind that created matter.
Right.
That third one represents religions like Judaism, Islam, or Christianity. The other ones, you've got atheistic naturalism, scientific naturalism, or you've got pantheism. And both of those, I think, came into play in the wildfire scenario because of the nature worship, the pantheism type, impetus there. But also Marxism comes from naturalism. It is atheistic at its core. And so the wildfires may have been initially caused by a spark of some arsonist or alien, but they didn't create the carnage apart from anything other than bad worldview.
Right. Okay, so now that kind of brings us to how does training ambassadors to universities even begin to do that? I'd like to point out, which I had started in our description of what we're going to be doing today, and I ended up changing it, is I look back and I ask myself what I think are interesting questions. How is it that culture was transformed in the first 300 years from a pagan culture, not unlike the one we're in today, to the Judeo-Christian worldview? And we find a couple of things pretty early on. Paul largely went to the centers of trade and education to found churches. And he confronted and challenged the philosophers of his day. And so over time, Christians basically out-argued and out-thought the pagans, as well as outlived them.
Mm-hmm.
And it took about 300 years to transform culture. Now, pagans have returned the favor over the last 200 years, I think is what we're saying. So how does, if I'm right on that, how does training ambassadors to go to universities help to transform culture?
In my forthcoming book, I talk about how ideas have consequences, bad ones have victims, and good ones can produce human flourishing. And while politics and culture are downstream, education is upstream, and at the very top of it is the university. We, as parents and grandparents, are continually sending in our kids after 18 years of blood, sweat, and tears. The Bible says, train them up in the way they should go. And when they get older, they won't depart from it. But in fact, when they get older, they're being conscripted to it because they're being educated into it. So if pastors, youth pastors, education pastors, senior pastors are not training our people for the ideas coming out of the universities, even if they're not called to go into the universities, they're failing to do their job in the same way that Biden failed to do his job. And we lost several 100,000 lives to fentanyl because of the southern border. He may not have poisoned them himself, but he allowed it to happen. If the shepherds are not guarding and equipping the students for the poisonous invasion that's coming into our churches, if the parents and grandparents are not doing the same, but instead, if we're sending our own children into these radical secular baptismal fonts, We're literally paying for the apostasy of our own children. So pastors, parents need to pay attention. Educators need to find out what are the worldviews that are coming out of the universities, even if you're not called to go into the university. But there are parachurches like Ratio Christi, like many others, that are going into the universities or at least around them and seeking to save souls, seeking to give reasons for the Christian faith. But what we need even more than that is we need to reclaim the intellectual voice of Christ at the highest levels in the universities.
Right.
And that entails that we're sending PhD students through the system to get PhDs to teach at the highest level of universities. Professors eventually become administrators. They become the presidents of UPenn and Harvard and MIT and so forth. And we need our political allies to keep the lights on for us, to keep the platform open for us. And that's what some of our state legislators can do. It's what our the case that Ratio Christi just won with the Biden administration's Department of Education just before Biden was out of office, 4-year litigation over a particular rule that was intended to protect Christian campus ministries from being discriminated against at universities for their beliefs. Otherwise, the Department of Education could withhold money from those public universities.
Right.
We need help like that so that when we're going into the universities, we can actually have some cover, because we're already self-censoring, we're already badgered, we're already being picked on. We need a game plan that includes parents, pastors, parachurches, philanthropists and donors, political allies, prayers. Most revivals happen in college campuses, including the Reformation itself. So we need all hands on deck. We need to reclaim the intellectual voice of Christ in the universities. At very least, we all need to prepare for the ideology coming out of the universities, because no one can escape it. As go the universities, so goes the culture.
Yeah. That's very important. So, okay. So let's say I'm an average pastor. I'm kind of struggling with, I have to prepare my Sunday morning sermon. Maybe I have a midweek thing. I have issues with an elder or two that I have to kind of work through. We have marital crisis going on with one or two families in the church. And now you're telling me I have to prepare the students for the university. What does that look like?
Well, 1 Peter 3:15 talks about being prepared, and it's not an invitation, it's not a suggestion, it's a command. And this divine command is now back in demand more than ever before in American history at the university campuses and throughout culture, but especially at the university campus. So you're right. The pastor's got a lot on his plate. A lot of pastors are resigning early. A lot of people are foregoing moving into the pastorate. It's a stressful place, and you've got a lot on your plate, and you're focused on the bell curve. I get that. But that's why you need to use resources that can come alongside, as Church does, right?
Yes.
And this is where Ratio Christi, as one among many members, comes along. And so if you look right behind me, you've got a book, 700-page book by Stephen Meyer on, the return of the God hypothesis. Well, you can read his 500 or 700-page book, but maybe you don't have time. We had him give that to us in 25 pages at the 11th grade reading level, and in digital or printable form. If you want something on trans, we have that also from a PhD who was trans and put it into her book into 25 pages. If you want anything on classical apologetics from science or scripture or suffering, we have booklets on that. If you want it on race, class, sex, any of those cultural issues now, we have booklets on that. So the pastor or the parent no longer says, gosh, I don't know where to begin. I don't have time to read 500 and 700-page books. We've got that kind of expertise reduced down to bite-sized chunks.
Okay, so now hold that thought,
because
we also want to point out that there's a game out there.
People are
It isn't
playing
a
the
real
games.
game.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but sometimes this kind of does help because they want to, rather enjoy life along the way.
Well, I think there's a lot going on there. So there's some questions. Have traditional family dinners become unbearably tedious? Are you looking for some kind of diversion that will distract others from your privilege? Do you want to be part of something bigger than yourself while remaining the center of your universe? Then we have just what you're looking for. Where's the outrage? The game where the woke shall inherit the earth, unless, of course, they're white males. In Where's the Outrage, they have no unfair inequality promoting dice. The rules for taking turns are simple. Each player gets points for being part of an oppressed group. Turns are taken in the order of the most points. Next, you choose a bankroller, that is, also known as the game's George Soros. The George Soros distributes the game cards. And now you're ready to play. Each player chooses a game piece and places it in the forward space. So we start off with Briannold, who is an African American, Native American, non-binary, transgender, former female, whose pronouns are Marx, Engels, and Lenin. And she has the most, or I'm sorry, Briannold has the most is the most points. So Briannold gets the first move, and Briannold decides to occupy the Christian-owned bakery and takes a free lawyer's card. Now Briannold is free to make another move. So Briannold uses this move to protest the fascist white supremacist concept of free speech and takes an entitlement card. And the fun of being the center of your universe is just beginning. Get the closest thing to real purpose you can buy back in your life while taking it away from others with Where's the Outrage, the game where the woke shall inherit the earth. So we have tons of fun with it. We hope you will too.
Is that a real board game?
No. We just really made it up. Did you
we-
see it's real McCoy, MCOI, the real McCoy.
the real
game
McCoy
company.
Game Company. So yeah. Well, it could be. I'm looking into marketing. Today, J.K. Rowling, her, she's she's the Harry Potter author who also is hated by the trans community because she has this strange idea that you really can't change sex and or gender. And somebody, with all this thing about Elon Musk giving a Nazi salute, someone made a photo of her. With AI, you can make just about any photo you want now. So they had a photo of her meeting with Hitler over a table. And it was a joke, of course. And the person who posted it said, well, you have some explaining to do, JK. What are you doing here with Hitler? And she goes, oh, yeah, I really regret having that meeting. He wanted me to do a child's version of Mein Kampf, but he wanted Eva Braun to do the pictures, and they were just awful. And so anyways, people are having a lot of fun with that.
So, okay. Now, you kind of laid out and said, okay, we have some simple information that can be helpful to pastors. You do need, Rochelle Christie needs, as you eloquently laid out, a whole number of people and those with interest to help us to train and educate ambassadors, recruit them into the universities to do this. And we talked just briefly about the role of the pastor and how they get overwhelmed, because they do. I know at my church, for example, Joy and I are resources to the church and the pastor. So when someone calls him and says, okay, someone just sent me this video, somebody just sent me this, I don't know how to respond to this, he just says, call Don. That's simple. I became a resource to the church. So what I'm proposing is, and I've proposed this for 20 years now, is every church or several churches together should partner with an apologist to handle these kinds of issues for you, because the pastor cannot do them. It's not humanly possible.
Yeah, in one sense, that's absolutely right. None of us can be experts in every field, and there's so much to know today. We need to know where to get the resources, and if they're available and in bite-sized chunks, that's really helpful. Now, everybody is called to be prepared, the
Right.
command, to give
Right.
an answer for the reason, for the hope that is within you, and do it with gentleness and respect. There we have in the context the heart, the hands, and the head of Christ.
Right.
That's the whole Christian right there. Especially important right now is the head if you're at universities. And if you're sending students off to universities, you've got to be prepared. So everybody has the command. You can't say, you know, I love the attitude, well, I don't have the gift of dishwashing, so that's my wife's job. No, there's no gift in the New Testament of dishwashing. That's whoever needs to, we all need to pitch in and get the job done. Everybody has to be able to refute false doctrine. Scripture commands it. Elders certainly should be doing it, or they're derelict of duty, but they don't have to do it alone. There are so many resources out there, digital, printable, video, whatever. Even the board game you just mentioned, I just looked it up to make sure. One of my staff came up with a card game. It's on Amazon called Wokelandia. I mean, there are tons of resources if you just look around, but everybody needs to jump in and take advantage of the resources, because we really are against something very subversive to the Christian faith. And it's not going away because of a mere election that for some people seems freeing, for other people it does not. But it's not just going away because an election. Politics lasts a certain period of years, and then there's a re-election. For Congress, it's every 2 years. For the president, it's every 4 years. You know, I think Trump got into office and reversed 78 of Biden's within hours, and then offered his own 70 plus. In 4 years from now, that can happen again.
Well,
And moreover, the educational institutes, the media pundits out there. When Jeff Bezos, who recently went down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the ring, he said 2 months ago, we are not endorsing a candidate. Well, that's like the first time. You know, he's over, I think it's the Washington Post. Yeah, we're not endorsing a candidate. That's because he read the direction of the wind.
Right.
But it's not like he fired all of his individual journalists who all hold the same worldview they did 15 minutes ago. They're still there. They're just putting lipstick on pigs now.
Well, and then you have, I think it's LA Times, if I'm not mistaken, they actually did get rid of their editorial board and started mixing things up with conservatives and other diverse viewpoints.
Yeah, it's becoming popular to find a dinosaur and get a token conservative now. At least you have one.
Well, you know, it's like they're starting to, you know how they say, you know, people who are investors will calculate in certain future losses that they're anticipating and things like that. I don't know how long they've been doing this politically, but they've been doing it very overtly with this new Doge thing. The Department of Government Efficiency, where they're saying we have to get all this done in 18 months because that's the beginning of the next election cycle. And everything could change. The whole game could be completely different. And we have to remember that as Christians too. I think there's a lot of euphoria right now. And I don't know how well placed it is. We don't really know if next month is going to be any good for the Trump administration. We don't know. We don't know what natural disaster is looming on the horizon, what new, you know, new version of COVID, you know, something, maybe not a pandemic, but something that scares people so much that they're willing to submit themselves to authoritarianism as opposed to freedom. That's really what it boiled down to with COVID. And so it's like the celebration, you know, we're kind of counting our chickens before they hatch is such an old adage, but I think it applies here.
I do. I think it applies.
And we have reason to celebrate, but it's temporary. If we don't, what happened recently is this. You've all seen a pool where you didn't put enough chlorine in it. It became severely discolored. You had to shock that pool with a lot of chlorine and extra chemicals after a pool party of 15 to 20. Now, maybe what if you had 1,500 people in that pool? I mean, it's going to be disgusting. It's going to look like a pond. You cannot see the bottom of this thing. So what did we do? We just dumped a huge dump truck of chlorine into the pool, and we could finally see bottom. It's been a long time. We're euphoric over this. But unless we change the source of where the water is coming from upstream, it's inevitable. It's just a matter of time before it gets dirty again. You've got to deal with the cause, the source of the problem, and not the symptoms. You can't keep putting chlorine downstream. We've got to go to the universities, or at least prepare for the ideology flowing from the universities.
Now, go ahead. Go ahead, Ron.
Well, here's where I want to, make sure we have the full picture. What is the ultimate problem? The mind is at the center of the ultimate problem, but the heart is even more central. In other words, we did have a culture at one time, 200 years ago. Well, people would argue that during the Revolution, the American Revolution, we had a largely Christian culture. Now, I would really push back on that, but there was enough of it that made its way into the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence that you hold it up to against what we have today, and it's just like night and day. It's so different. But at the same time, there was rampant unbelief. The heart was not, the hearts of so many, including our leaders, including our thought leaders, were not really in tune with it. So you by the time you get to the end of the 18th century, you have a terrible need for a second great awakening. So in other words, what I'm sure Ratio Christi is doing this, and any good campus ministry is addressing the heart issues as well as the head issues.
Sure. In Paul's magnum opus, the book of Romans, chapters 5-8 is the heart of the book of Romans even. And it's about the Holy Spirit, from suffering and the Spirit in chapter 5 all the way to suffering in the Spirit in chapter 8. Once you get through all of the exposition, the teaching, the doctrines of Romans 1-11, you hit the application. What's next? Therefore, 12 and following. 12 says, I urge you, therefore, brothers, by the mercy of God, to present yourselves as a living sacrifice. This is your spiritual service of worship, right? Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Do not be conformed to the world, et cetera, et cetera. Paul's taking into consideration the heart, what he was dealing with even in the middle of Romans as well. We've always battled in the church between the primacy of the heart or the will or the mind. I think in scripture, we see these coming together. For Ratio Christi, our vision statement is thoughtful Christianity. It's an ambiguous term, thoughtful, intentionally, because we want people to think, what do you think of when you think of, she's a thoughtful person? Well, you think she's a compassionate, a considerate. You're thinking about the heart, about the affections, perhaps. You're also thinking about rational and contemplation. And for us, we're thinking both and. Our vision is thoughtful Christianity, transforming lives on campus today, changing culture tomorrow. So saved people, changed lives, Chuck Colson used to say. There's a shortcoming there. And James Davison Hunter, the sociologist, a Christian from University of Virginia, points this out. He says, changed lives, changed cultures has an element of truth. But when you're talking about cultural revolutions, all of them virtually, they never take effect, even if they begin from the grassroots, until they're baptized by the elite. They've got to gain traction from the elite. We have to think about institutional recapture, not just changing lives, which is vastly important, but institutional recapture. See, right now, even in the politics, when we talk about having political alliances, you can have the transhumanist Elon Musk who gets it. He's not saved, but at least he's got some common sense that the same rain rains on the just and the unjust. You've got Vivek Ramaswamy. He's Hindu. He's got some common sense. You've got some Democratic presidential candidates that have come over to the Republican Party. There's a lot of people that Joe Rogan and so forth. Richard Dawkins even wants to call himself a cultural Christian now.
Right.
Existentialist. I'm not pretending any of these people are Christians. I would much rather be governed by Cyrus the Great than Emperor Nero. And I think minimally that's the condition we find ourselves in, where it's a help. We do want to go for the souls. And so I agree with you on that.
Well, what the way I would put it is to try to avoid this dichotomy or dilemma, false dilemma of head and heart. I would say you have to go through the head to get to the heart. There's really no choice. Now the problem is everybody has a different head. Some people their heads are too hard. Right. So you're going to have getting through to hard-headed people at any academic level, is going to be difficult. And then some people's heads are too soft, too much. They absorb too much, and they don't discern between, the hard-headed person is the person who is just closed-minded. The soft-headed person, in my extended metaphor here, is the person who, falls for anything because he doesn't stand for anything because his heart's not right. So, you have to go through the head to get to the heart, and you have to train people. You have to train people to be able to get through people's heads, but to not lose sight of the purpose. That the purpose is to get to their hearts, and that's because the two are bound together. So if you look at, the Reformation definition of saving faith, it's knowledge, mental assent. Those first two things are the head, and then trust, fiducia. So
that's right.
That's when you get to the heart. But you have to go through two layers of the head to get to the
Paul
heart.
says in Romans 9, he talked about the hardness of the heart. In 2 Corinthians 6, he talked about how their minds were hardened.
Right.
And so the heart cannot embrace what the mind cannot believe.
And in Hebrew, it's the same word.
We're appealing to both.
Yeah.
Right?
In Hebrew, it's the same word for both mind and heart. And so it's like they were considered such an overlap. Now, in Greek you have nous and you have cardia.
I'd have to look that up. Yeah, I did. It's a good, interesting. Rabbit case on that. I agree.
Yeah. So, but it's like your mind and your heart. I mean, they're both at the core of your being, because as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. You think in your heart. There's such an extensive overlap. But I was just saying, Don, while you were gone, you have to go through the head to get to the heart.
Yeah, I agree. But your heart ultimately does rule your inner being.
And it changes your mind.
Someone has said, I forget who this was, but a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still.
Yeah, I heard that a long time ago, and I hated it when I heard it because I thought I could convince anybody. I thought I could convince anybody. That's not true. But no, it turned out to be true.
So, all right. So, all of that to get to this, you have started a program for professors. Why did you start it? What is it? And how can those who are listening interact with it, help with it, pray for it? Those kinds of questions.
Yeah. So the Malik Academic Fellowship, it's another way, with what Ratio Christi has a RC College Prep where we help with churches, Christian schools, things like that, to equip them and prepare them. There's that prepare. We come alongside churches, Christian institutes, high schools, homeschools for going into university. And then we've got our chapters there at the universities, but we also have a plan designed to start reclaiming the intellectual voice of Christ at the professorate. So we've got a prof ministry where we help them to become not professors who happen to be Christians, but Christian professors, missional professors. And in particular, we now start funding PhD students. So if anyone listening knows PhD students who are getting into R1 schools, that means the top 130 schools. The reason we do that is because you get jobs on the back end when you get your PhD.
Right.
You graduate from the top universities. If you get accepted there, we will consider you for a Malik Academic Fellowship, Charles Malik was the UN Secretary General. He was the senior architect behind the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And he once gave a lecture at Wheaton College on the two tasks, redeeming the soul and redeeming the mind. where he said the mind of culture is the university. So he says the university is a clear-cut fulcrum with which to move the world. More potently than by any other means, change the university and you change the world. And so we are helping to fund Christian PhD students who get into the top universities. We walk with them weekly for years and help them to launch a Christian PhD student only chapters at these top universities. So that say they train 10 other PhD students as we've trained them, and that chapter does it for 10 years. You've got 100 PhD students now that have been trained as missional professors. And each professor has a career of 40 years, maybe 15,000 students each. That means 1.5 million undergrad students will be exposed to a missional professor for at least one semester. That is if we fund one Malik academic fellow. What if we funded 10? What if we funded 100? This is a game plan to reclaim the intellectual voice of Christ at the universities that almost no one else is doing. So we're encouraging people to be donors to it. We're encouraging people to reach out to PhD students who may have what it takes to do this. And we want to reclaim territory on ground that we founded. We started the universities. We at least ought to have an equal playing field there.
Right. Yeah, right. How is that going so far?
It's young, but we have chapters at places like Rutgers, University of Tennessee, Oregon State, Baylor, Texas A&M. Looks like we probably will pick up UCLA and Cambridge coming up here. Cambridge is in England, but we will consider Cambridge and Oxford since so many graduates come back into the U.S. Sure. So our goal is to get one of these chapters launched at every R1 campus. 4,000 universities, but there's 130 of the R1 campuses. And it doesn't take having to reclaim Harvard, Princeton, and Yale that may have fortresses built up. But you know what? You don't need to. Yale has, 10, 15,000 students? Purdue, Texas A&M, University of Florida, all R1 schools, they have 70 to 90,000 students. So whereas the New York Times might still be the paper of record, and there is prestige with the name, USA Today has far more subscribers. So there's more than one way to skin a cat here. Al Mohler proved that you can take back an institution by taking a liberal Southern Baptist seminary and turning it over. Al Plantinga proved that you can take back or at least establish a Normandy-sized beachhead at a major discipline like philosophy. So if it's happened university-wide at the professorate, not just once with the revolution of scientific naturalism, 1880 to 1930, but twice now with postmodern cultural Marxism, it can happen again. And we need to, as a coalition, come together, put our muscle and minds behind it, and launch a third revolution.
Are you familiar with the landscape, the intellectual landscape in the United Kingdom and their university system? Has it succumbed the same way and to the same extent as the North American system has?
I mean, I did my PhD eventually, second PhD attempt, because I was told I had too much of a faith perspective in my first PhD in the U.S.
Too much.
So I graduated from the University of Aberdeen, and I defended under the guy who claims to be the only trans philosopher in the UK, and wrote an open letter to J.K. Rowling lambasting her for being anti-trans and pro-feminist and lesbian. In any case, the UK is not quite like the US in that they've already long ago pushed God out of their system. Right. They've got, like many European situations, they've got a mix of state and church and state schools, but no one really believes over there. So you study it like an academic kind of discipline. Here in the US, it's a bit different because people actually believe this stuff. And so it's a fight for the soul of the culture and the soul of the universities. And so it's likely more hostile in the US than it is in the UK at the university levels.
What does like you were a believer, did you face the same? Did you face the same kind of fight there that you would here? And if you didn't, is it perhaps because they didn't really consider you much of a threat?
I mean, I'm taking some of what I'm saying. Some of it is data driven. Some of it is anecdotal.
Yeah,
Friends of mine that are in the UK right now, we've got partnerships that extend into the UK with Cambridge, with Oxford, and so forth. But just from their own testimonials and people who have done graduate work across the pond in both ways, they've confirmed this thesis that I'm talking about.
which
So
is
in my case, though, I mean, at the US, I had to go legal as an undergrad at Salt Lake Community College. I had to go legal at Indiana University in the Midwest because a former pastor who had turned gay charged me with creating a suicidal environment. So
what do
two
you mean
atheists
go
go
legal?
legal. I meant contact the cavalry, contact Alliance Defending Freedom, and pony
Okay.
up with legal resources, because I was being unjustly charged with creating a suicidal environment because someone just didn't like the fact that I was educating rather than indoctrinating. I require students to purchase my textbooks, which are only authored by atheists and agnostics. I guarantee you my agnostic or atheist colleagues don't require Christian texts. I'm going above and beyond what they do because I sort of have to fly under the radar. But when I'm able to be in the classroom, then I can give equal airtime at some point. I tell people we're all biased, and you're biased and I'm biased. It's only fair that I let you know that I am a apprentice of Jesus, and I think Christianity is intellectually superior to all competing worldviews. At that time, the mic drops, jaws drop, and it becomes a new class for the semester. Right. But that said, I then went over, I lost my first PhD in the Midwest also for having too much of a faith perspective. And then I faced off against a Augustinian moral philosopher, department head in the UK, who claimed to be the only trans philosopher, or the first trans philosopher in the UK. So I have faced hostilities across the board. I know what
so
it's
he was
like.
hostile. He was definitely hostile to you.
Oh,
yeah.
Yes, I can tell you how the dissertation defense went, and the questions and the answers and the conversations that we had there. I barely, I thought I'm not going to get it. I'm done for. Second PhD is over. I graduated. God has a sense of humor that I don't appreciate.
Yeah.
But what they meant for evil in various places, God meant for good. And he often takes you through the fire to prepare you for something else. And I think all of that was preparation, because 2 months later, I got a call from Ratio Christi with a job opening. And I said, I'll take it. What is it? It's president. Oh, okay. I don't know anything about that, but that was 10 years ago.
Okay.
Well, and I'm glad you're there. Okay. So training professors to be ambassadors to the university, in turn starting groups of PhD students together with this professor and being trained to be ambassadors to the university.
I have one thing I want to insert here. Can I do that?
No, you cannot.
I'm going to do it anyway. In recent years, I'm talking 2 or 3 years, I have detected in academia pushback, a rather dismissive pushback against the concept of worldview. It even came out of Wheaton College at one point.
Yeah.
And that's my alma mater, my grad alma mater. Have you noticed that, where they're just saying, well, we just don't, worldview isn't even a valid concept, or it's not a helpful concept?
I mean, I guess it depends. Professors, look, in the sciences, on one wing of the university, the hard sciences, they think that the worldview that is true is naturalism. At least epistemically, it's methodological naturalism. But many of them think that it's metaphysical naturalism. They think that nature is all that is, was, or ever will be. And so they conduct their epistemic research programs in accordance to that, where they look for merely, sense-based evidence to support their viewpoints. On the other side of the university, you have the humanities, you have the social sciences. That's where Marxism came from, which was built on naturalism, but took a different turn. And then from the Marxists came the postmodernists. And the dirty little secret here is that the famous Axis powers of Germany and Italy that were ultimately fascist were wrestling with Marxism. Mussolini was first a communist. But it was a battle between the globalist socialists and the national socialists. I get into this in my book. And that's where you find the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, which we hear now critical race theory, critical gender theory, critical queer theory, critical pedagogy, critical. If it's not critical thinking, it's bad news. Don't touch it. That's up north in Germany. Down south in Italy, you have Gramsci, who was imprisoned for his whole life, never got out by Mussolini, but his prison notes got out and they were translated into the English-speaking world in Indiana here at Notre Dame, of all places, by Marxist professor Joseph Buttigieg. That's right, father of Mayor Pete. The Marxism goes down the line. Now, postmodernism, if you think about the fountainheads of postmodernists, like Lyotard, the postmodern turn, you think about Foucault, Derrida, and so forth, deconstruction. You hear about Christian worship bands deconstructing the faith. Postmodernism. Well, guess what? All of those guys in France, 15 years behind the critical theorists in Germany, were members of the French Communist Party. There's a whole story behind that. I get into that in my book as well. So it's naturalism all the way down, one way or another. Either you stop and say there is truth and it's only scientific truth on scientific naturalism, or you take it the distance that, go into Marx and then to critical theory and postmodern critical theory, and you say truth is nothing more than power. Truth is what my peers will let me get away with. And they hate worldviews in the sense that they say, they're skeptical of meta narratives, right? In that sense, yes, I would sympathize with where you're going with that. So it depends on what wing of the university you might be talking about.
Yeah.
And
I'm talking about, this is among evangelicals. I mean, we've had 50 years of who is that author who started the whole world? Well, he was instrumental. The World Next Door.
Oh, James Sire.
And you had other authors too who were in on the foundation of educating Christians on the existence and importance of worldview to help understand what's going on when you're trying to evangelize, when you're trying to understand what your kids are coming back from college with, and within the last few years among evangelicals, I have been hearing this, and sometimes I just wonder, is it because they're educationally deficient in this area, and so therefore they become dismissive of it because they can't figure out what application it has?
And in a sense, it's interesting as I was listening to you, Corey, kind of laying all this out, I kept thinking to myself, okay, what they're talking about is what Dr. Peter Jones would call oneism. Everything is one. That's a worldview. Yeah. You can call it something else. It's still a worldview. So, and what we're finding in what Ron's laying out within evangelicalism is kind of like the Church of Christ that says no creed but Christ, and they don't seem to realize that's a creed.
It's what I believe. Credo. I believe.
It's what I believe. So when they're trying to say that don't use worldviews, they're not good, they're not helpful. They're using a worldview to tell you not to use a worldview. It's self-refuting.
Yeah.
I just have noticed it, and it might not be still going on, because sadly I think people are not educated enough on the books of James Sire and others. So anyways,
and worldview and apologetics, they're not identical, but they overlap. I just think the problem with Christians in this area is that we have the menace of mindless Christianity. We are headless Christians. We kicked the head of Christ out and maintained the hands and the heart of Christ only. And a headless being like that just doesn't function the way it's designed to function. And so most Christians don't do evangelism. So they don't do apologetics evangelism or worldview evangelism. As you guys pointed out earlier with the recent statistics, most Christians in the country are simply biblically illiterate, how much more so than philosophically, apologetically, or worldview oriented illiterate.
I had a pastor years ago. He had taught apologetics at Bible college. He stopped because he found that those who were going through the class just become kind of mean spirited, always wanted to argue about everything. And so then he met Joy and I, and he decided, you can be an apologist and still be a kind person. That was a revelation to him. And so he would speak at our conference, and he did a talk on mindless evangelism and heartless apologetics.
Very good. I like it.
Right. So it's kind of on that way. Anyway, we're going to need to wrap it up. We're a little bit over, and I thank you so much for being part of this. The university is important. It's largely, I think, neglected because Christians are afraid of it. And I think they should be afraid of it because they're not training their students to be in college where their faith is going to be assaulted.
Yeah, that's right. So we've got this is a brain.
Okay.
Ratio Christi, thoughtful Christianity. One square represents apologetics, the other evangelism. We like to say, if someone needs a hug, we give them a hug. If someone needs an argument, we are the ministry on campus to give them an argument. We all need to be prepared to give an answer for the reason, for the hope that lies within us, and do it with gentleness and respect. Love God with your head, your heart, and your hands.
Ron, will you walk us out of here?
Let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Kneel Before Me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummus. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-check supervisor is Joleg Pulling. Our technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never. Or at least it hasn't happened yet.
We're waiting. Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
Blessings, everybody.
Blessing. Thanks